Hello, my name is David Pickering, and I'm professor of music at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. And I am here on June the 2nd, 2025, in Warrensburg, Missouri, at Michael Quimby's home, interviewing Michael Quimby, president and founder of Quimby Pipe Organ.
Thank you, David.
It's been a delight to know you for so many years and to become acquainted with your work and your ideas on organ building. And I look forward to finding out more about your background and history as part of this interview. Sure. So if we were to go back earlier in your life, what is your earliest musical memory?
My mother playing piano.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
I remember that.
Did she give you your first piano lessons?
Yes.
Okay.
And then after that, studied with numerous people as things went along.
Mm-hmm.
And studied piano up through high school and then started organ playing. And at the same time was in getting involved with organ building.
Mm-hmm.
Probably I should look at you. And as far as my first encounter with a pipe organ, it was at First United Methodist Church in Stillwater, Oklahoma. A modest three-manual Hillgreen and Lane that I heard. And then the trip through the organ chambers is what lit the bug that's never gone away. And it's been fine, but the reason I had that opportunity because I was in the boys' choir there.
Okay.
That those still existed at that time. It was a real learning experience.
And you were in Stillwater because your father was at Oklahoma State University.
Yes, he was finishing his residence work on his doctorate.
Okay.
That's the reason. And then after that, we came here.
Okay.
From northeastern Oklahoma, probably where it's closest to a geographical town that they would know about is Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Which ironically has an organ of ours in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it was a great experience growing up, and the first organ I saw in here in Warrensburg was the one at the Methodist Church, which is considerably changed, and then the McManus organ in Hart Recital Hall at the University of Central Missouri, where I got my bachelor's and master's degree.
Right. And preceding your university days, you had the interest in organ building, as in music. Were you good at taking things apart and putting them together? You must have obviously shown some early mechanical aptitude at that kind of thing.
Actually, my first experience with actually doing things with organs was with Colin Campbell, the Moeller representative in this part of the world. And I started holding keys for him when I was 14.
Okay.
And then when he came, in those years, my folks would let me skip school to hold keys. And that was a very opportune thing, and learned a lot from him over the years through college and so forth. He was very meticulous, which I'm glad that I encountered somebody who was that way. To set the stage that everything had to be beautiful inside.
Right.
And that made a difference of how you look at things. His concept was rooted in the Moeller tradition from that time, but Charles McManus was the biggest mentor as far as tonal concepts as I developed as a younger person. And that was very worthwhile because he never was threw away the idea of nicking, and always was interested in producing the most musical term. In fact, he called nicking the steel girders that guide the wind stream.
Ah.
He wasn't in favor of, he did do stops at shift, but anything with white noise, and I agree to that to this day, like the buzz and sizzle is not energy, it's just noise. So we were caught up in that extreme for a long time. And as we've seen over the last 50 years, things have changed. In fact, when I was a sophomore in college, he said, by the time you reach your 7th decade, you'll probably be building organs with French horns and English horns and all those things again. So it just shows that the tonal wheel goes around and brings back something that's stuck with me for years is Nelson Barton's statement, fashion wears out more organs than playing ever will. And the poor pipe organ has suffered more from the foolishness of fashion changes than any of the other instruments in the orchestra or the piano or otherwise.
No, I'd agree with you on that for sure. Absolutely. Going back to your high school years again. So you had mentioned you started, when did you officially begin your organ studies?
Actually, I was sophomore in high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was with an organist here in town.
Well, it was with Dr. Frederick Holman, not to be confused with the one who's presently living.
Absolutely.
Who taught here, and Dr. Bill McCandless, who is still living and lives now in Kansas City with his wife, Marcille.
Okay.
And they were here for, at least, I would imagine, over 40 years. Because he came here after studying with George Wilson at Indiana University.
Okay.
In fact, both of my teachers studied with him.
Okay. Wonderful. And so you studied with them during your high school and college years?
Yeah, bachelor's up through a master's.
Okay. What were their teaching strategies? And which of those did you respond to?
Well, Dr. Holman, or Fred Holman, was you learn things methodically and carefully. One of the first assignments with any composition you were to learn was you had to finger it. And then you had to present how you were going to, why your fingerings were valid for the piece you were going to do. And then after you did that, you learned right hand, you learned left hand, you learned pedal, and then put it together. And then as soon as it got under control, then you began to make musical sense out of it. But it had to be played accurate. As far as memorization, if it was required, it was always like Dupre, I think, started for the backwards and went to the first of it. So it was a very methodical, systematic plan. Dr. Holman was still caught up in part, well, he never rejected like a lot of organists where everything up to the time of after Mendelssohn was verboten, that everything was still on the table to learn.
Oh, that's great.
As in organs should be able to play practically anything if they're well designed. You don't need esoteric instruments and put them in churches where what are you going to do with them after they are in there for 40 years? What are you going to do within the next 40 years if they're only designed to play Bach and pre-Bach? And especially if you find this creation in an Episcopal church,
Right.
or a French classic organ that doesn't accompany Anglican worship at all. And I think a lot of people got, with the Fulbright scholars and everything, got caught up in all this interesting sound, but they didn't really stop to look at the national schools.
Mm-hmm. Right.
An English organ is an entirely different thing than a French organ, Cavaillé, Clicquot, or whatever, because the English organ accompanies all aspects of the worship service, and the French organ doesn't accompany hymns. It just accompanies the music in the service. And then the Lutheran, the German organ is an entirely different thing. It's meant to accompany hymns, but it has a more brash character, even from the early time up through even Ladecast and Sauer and so forth, or Volker.
Sure.
Because the Volker organ that came here with the Boston Music Hall set the stage for a lot of things in this country.
Sure.
And the organs in Holland are different yet, and the organs in Scandinavia or up in those countries are, at least the time I was growing up, they were the brightest and sharpest in sound intensity of any of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One aspect of your study was also you studied vocal music under a woman named Eleanor Shockey.
Oh, yes.
And what was her influence in your musical education?
Well, she knew that learning was to go on, and it did go on. And her job, since most people don't know this, I actually taught school for 5 years.
Didn't you?
Yes.
I don't think So was this high school?
High school, and of all things, kindergarten 1 and 2.
Really?
At Noster, Missouri, which is better known for where Whiteman Air Force Base, where the B-2s are stationed.
Mm-hmm. And did you teach, in high school, did you teach choral music? Is that
music?
Okay.
Never instrumental.
I did not know that.
Mm-mm. Most people don't. But her job, she says, I know what you're going to do. She says, we have a goal in mind. She says, first of all, we got to get you a job so you can save money. And then my late wife at the time says, okay, when we save up 1 year's salary, then we'll go do what you want to do. And she was an organist. She was a pianist, an excellent vocal teacher. She had a number of very famous students, including Marianne Hart, who retired a number of years ago from Indiana School of Music at Bloomington.
Okay.
And sang in New York for years.
Okay. She also, in addition to her musical influence, did she also, with the way that she handled people, did that rub off onto you in any way?
Oh,
on your people skills?
She was an extraordinary teacher.
Mm-hmm.
She only had a master's degree. Maybe she was an older lady, but she really cared about her students.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I consider her one of the best teachers I had in undergraduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Kind, caring, but demanded discipline.
Mm-hmm.
She was one of these ladies you loved to death, but you didn't want to disappoint her.
Sure. Absolutely. So you did the teaching to save money so that you could do what you want to do. And Quimby Pipe Organs was incorporated in 1970.
Yeah.
And began doing tuning and maintenance work. And
it grew from there into rebuilding organs and building organs. And you learn a tremendous amount by starting that way, or starting with somebody like Colin, about what you can get to if you can't service an organ, or if it's so jammed full of stuff that you can't do anything with it to repair it. It's doomed to a short life. The classic example of that was the old Kilgan that used to be at Independence Boulevard Christian Church in Kansas City, where the only respectable thing to do when they got a chance in 1971 was just to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And room to service things. I know there's different schools that saying you need to have no access or inside of an instrument, like some of the organ reform builders hanging on for dear life from ladders or poles or whatever.
Sure.
And that's not fun.
Yes.
But so much of it depends on where the style is at the time. Because we've seen Mr. Skinner and others who did good work totally reviled and rejected. And now as the fashion has changed, look at Tom Murray started playing transcriptions again and those kind of things. But I would say at this point in time, it's the most diverse period in organ building, where you see everything from the most severe restrictive instruments to ones that are just over the top with mechanical gadgets. You see people that want to do nothing but Bach and pre-Bach. You see people who want to play romantic literature and everything that didn't exist before, because in the past, the organ moved the whole part of organ building, say in the 19th century, they were all in lockstep, different ones doing different things, but they still had the same stylistic goals and move forward. And I think that sort of was what was happening in this country till, well, let's say Walter Holtkamp.
Yeah.
Organs that are exposed and out in the open, that was something entirely new. And then you had G. Donald Harrison with that concept as well, but the organs there were still had their foot in the romantic movement. And one reason I think they were so popular in churches and sold so well.
Yeah.
And it must have been so because every other builder that was around, Moeller, Reuter, Schantz, Boston, they were all busy copying aspects of Holtkamp or what Harrison was trying to do.
Absolutely.
And that genre of organ is still of interest to a good many people. Some people accuse us of being in that style completely, but we are not. I look over the whole element of the national schools and look at the literature, and what we dream up, or I dream up in my head, is what I think will accomplish that to the best purpose.
And so how would you elaborate upon that? that how your style has developed to encompass the breadth of requirements that are placed upon the instruments that you build?
Well, Charles McManus was totally steeped in the vert principe, made on the great 4 and the swell 2 and mixtures 1 and a third, and even higher and higher. And that was, but everything was always voiced very cleanly. It was easy to tune. The one thing that Charles did not like, or it shows in his instruments, his reeds were awful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he liked that awful sound.
Mm-hmm.
But I never liked that awful sound.
Mm-hmm.
And then just traveling and broadening out to create our own synthesis of what I consider musical. Not overdone, but exciting. There's too many organs by some of the mainline builders in the past that I would say are rather boring and vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be very careful when you go look at a room to relate back to what you've seen in other places.
Mm-hmm.
You need to scale the pipe work so you voice it up to its maximum potential, but never, never overdo it. Never push it beyond what the scale, and it'll tell you the story, and never underdo it.
Mm-hmm. In what couple of main aspects do you feel like your pipework or your instruments differ in the American classic style?
Harrison tended to, like in the Tabernacle, keep dynamic levels more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really, you put it all together and it's sort of homogeneous sound.
Mm-hmm.
I was really fascinated by the work of T.C. Lewis in England.
Mm-hmm.
And how those choruses work. They're academic, but they're beautiful. They're quite amazing. And of course, he was a disciple of Schulze.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we don't want to go as far as that kind of tonality, but that with a little less edge is what I prefer in a chorus sound. And all of our diapason choruses are voiced with the languid high.
Mm-hmm.
So what is called slow side voicing, it's not slow to the player, but it's much more majestic. It gives you a singing quality. It's a baritone quality. And the one thing when you voice with the languid high, you have the appropriate scales. Well, the organ at William Jewell demonstrated it very closely. If you draw the 8 and then you pull on the 4, there's not a bump.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of organs you can pull and there's a bump with each pitch. So if you can pull everything 8, 4, 2 2/3, 2, a mixture, and no one comes on as a pop, then you've got the overtone series in the order it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this country, for a good bit of time, Moeller was especially bad about it. And they're gone, so I can say what I want to. But they had their choruses inverted, where the 8 foot was softest, the 4 was louder, the 2 was even louder. And heavens forbid, the mixture was right there ready to decapitate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was ready to go. Our instruments are the other way.
Right.
And as far as flutes and those kind of things, there's things that I like from Harrison and Harrison, from Willis, from Sauer, Ladegast.
Mm-hmm.
You pick what you like. As far as modern voices, Skinner did some things there that are very lovely, but everybody loves bass strings, splatter dolces, which started with Skinner, and they like their orchestral voices again.
Sure.
And it was very interesting about all this stuff with the organs where the overtone series was out of balance. Because one thing my wife hated, she could not stand mixtures.
Interesting. In what way?
She thought they distorted the line in a hymn because of the breaks. They confused the soprano line. And if you voice things on the quick side with the languid low, resulting in a more fluty diapason and those kind of things, the whole thing just doesn't stick together.
Right.
It sort of it's like it's trying to blow itself apart.
I no doubt the inverted tonal pyramid that was more in vogue at that time certainly did nothing to help that either.
Oh, with quick voicing, no,
Yeah.
and you'll see it because, well, an example, in England, there are a lot of Harrison organs that are the voicing is on the quick side. And then you'll notice that the Lewis organs are all on the slow side. And you'll see other builders here and there in between. The reeds that Father Willis and his son, Harry Vincent Willis, created were incredibly fine in their acoustical surroundings. And the French reeds of Cavalier Cole or the others were very good. But it really, for them to be successful, they really need to be in a room with a generous acoustic. I think there's nothing worse than bringing in that type of reed that we hear sometimes put in organs and totally dead acoustics. And it's just an unpleasant, unmusable sound, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you for sure. Speaking of the way in which your instruments have grown over time with exposure, you went to Europe
Oh, yes.
in 1997. And what were the effects of that trip and what you encountered and what you studied there? How did that affect your style?
It was a big change. The earlier organs did not espouse raw and crude voicing, as I call it. In fact, Opus 1 is here, and you could follow that. That has a lot of Ringmanist tendencies, except a little firmer chorus work. And the reeds, even in that order, are not like what was in his, because I could really never stand them. So I rejected those. But the trip to England, Eric Johnson went with me. It was brought about primarily because of the organ that we were going to do in St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, where Jonathan Ambrosino was the consultant. And he was also on that trip. And Tom Brown, who could play anything out of his head because of his photographic memory, was well versed at knowing how to handle the Quimby console and all the ventals, and just an understanding of how to drive a Willis organ, a Harrison and so forth, and just seeing all that. But the one thing I came away from that, I said, well, I think we sort of got a little bit carried away with the vertebrancy. So it was like an abandonment of that all at once. So the first one that was solidly rooted in that, the way I was given total freedom to design an organ, was at William Jewell College in Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And every division has a unison diapason. They're different in how they're done. The one in the grate is open, in the, you could say the Lewis style, not exactly if you compared it. The one in the swell is slotted, and then the one is treated differently with a different kind of slot in the choir. But then that varied. Like at Fourth Presbyterian in Chicago, that everyone is diverse and different.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the grate has 1, 2, and 3 diapasons, octave in principle. The swell has a tapered principle, but not, I would call a Spitz principle, scaled differently, but 2 scales smaller. It gives it a different tonal character. And then the one in the choir is slotted. And then the one in the solo is just a big boy diapason, but not like a Skinner or any of the builders like Kimball or Austin. Stenophone is just a bold, I call it a solo diapason.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reeds are all in the style of what we've done, and Eric has brought them to a degree of perfection that you don't often see. Because like at Methodist Church here, I doubt that any of those reed ranks have been gone through completely in now a decade.
Wow.
And it was a lot that he learned from observation in Europe. Because the worst thing you can do is make some people think they need to make the tuning wire, or where the wire hits the tongue, as heavy as possible. And that causes things to jump if you have to tune on the wire.
Mm-hmm.
If you have lead-faced shallots, over time they'll put a divot in the lead in the shallot and actually change the curve of the tongue.
Okay.
But in England, the English builders, the tongue, it sits there, but as Eric calls it, it kisses the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll just sit there. And one thing that gives the reeds that are imported such a, because of their instability with tuning, and also their, too squawky sound, is the resonators are all a half step short to pitch.
Uh-huh.
Whereas in Alias Skinner, they're exactly the length. And the E.M. Skinner reeds, whether it was his idea or not, those are overly long, but they stay in tune like the Rock of Gibraltar. As with Opus 190, that used to be at Grand Avenue United Methodist Church at the National Convention, another one, everybody could not believe the reeds were sitting there and behaving themselves at 90 degrees. But it was because of the overlays.
Mm-hmm.
It adds ability of control over the physics of the whole thing.
Sure.
So we've learned a lot. We forgot a lot. One thing that was despicable during this past period is pipe metal that's too thin.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that down in Clinton, Missouri with Kevin Kissinger. We were doing finishing work, and I was working on the 4-foot octave. And for some reason, he was playing it, and I put my hand on it, and all of a sudden, it changed because it got more fundamental, and the overtones went in order. And you can't, because if a pipe is too thin, the pipe metal is too thin, you're going to lose some of that overtone how it moves and how it all interrelates. Because if it's dissipating out the wall of the pipe, you're going to lose things. But if it's solid, it'll hold all of that together. And that was further exemplified in the English church with Lewis and Harrison and all those. Saw many organs there that were fascinating. The Lewis organ, that color coats on the Irish Sea was a wonderful instrument. And the Michelle and Thin at Tewkesbury Abbey, that was an experimental organ. There 4 manuals with each manual having a different key action.
Oh my.
Yes, it was done for the exposition.
Huh?
But fine voicing.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably, as far as tuning, the best. Well, we do. I think in this country we overtune.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as tuning in general, the English and American organs are always the most easy to come by. Because French organs were never into, like when Henry Willis III asked I guess it was the head tuner. I think they were at St. Sulpice or Notre Dame, and Henry Willis III was having a fit about how badly the mixtures were out of tune. And he says, we tune the mixtures every 50 years for a rebuild. And that was in 24. I think things have certainly changed over the time, but a difference.
Wow. Yeah, I should say so.
In addition to your own work with newer instruments or maybe instruments of the organ reform movement, you've also had the blessing of restoring some historic instruments in the Kansas City area with the Hook and Hastings, or in Lexington, Missouri with the 1860s Derek Felgemacher
Yes.
and Company portable organ. Are there some interesting, what are the challenges and rewards of restoring such historic instruments?
You learn things from your forefathers.
Mm-hmm.
One should be very leery of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to happen with organ building in this country and Europe. They throw out the ideas of their fathers or their grandfathers and come up with something new. And they think they're the ones who are right, but they don't look back. Because we see organ builders in this country that are very stubborn. There's only one way. It's my way or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, in my opinion, wrong, because you just need to look at what came before you, like the 1869 E&GG Hook that came from Troy, New York. This Rainbow Mennonite Church. A smallish organ of 17 ranks, but it's brave and very musically rewarding. It has something to stay with its diapason chorus 8/4/2 mixture and its trumpet and the great. It was an excellent vehicle for accompanying. The Grand Avenue Skinner, even though it wasn't completely done, but it was kept alive because I watched over that organ since I was 20 and now I'm 74. You could see what Skinner was doing around that time. In fact, if we have time, the 8 and 4 foot second diapason and octave are on the voicing, Sean Estenek's voicing room, and you can see, and the organ would have probably been voiced in 1911. It was dedicated in February of 12, I guess 2 months or so before the Titanic sunk. But the nicking is much lighter. It doesn't become excessive like it did as we move into the 20s. But then we see things, E.M. Skinner changing at the influence of Henry Willis, but he never did quite go what Henry Willis wanted him to do to create a Willis organ. But you can see that change, and G. Donald Harrison coming and how that influenced Woolsey Hall, how that influenced Trinity College in Hartford. And it all was a continuation. And probably the strongest influence on Harrison was Senator Richards. Because that's who coined the American classic term.
Yeah.
Because it's rare to find anything that Harrison has really written of any substance. Like that one essay that was presented, you don't see that where he just sort of lays it out.
That's true.
And then you can see it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the Barnes, the contemporary American organ.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a place that nobody would think that you would find anything.
So true. Right.
Because, that's so dated. It's out of date. It has no value in it. And here's this article by G. Donald Harrison and Ned Gammons. And you just have to be on the lookout for things that are hidden.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How did you first get involved into the Organ Historical Society?
Because I started out bringing back to life little trackers around here, of which there's a plenitude of. My favorite one is in Lincoln, Missouri. Its builder is unknown, or at least I haven't seen anything like that. And others, it was built for a church originally in St. Louis, and then it was brought to that church in the middle of rural Missouri in 1924, and I became acquainted with it in 1970 because they almost lost it because of vandalism by a electronic organ salesman who walked through the 2 foot on the grate and broke off oboe resonators.
There.
But that was fixed. And there's down in that particular area, there's that one. There is a one manual Kilbin from before 1883 that came from St. Louis by way of Concordia and was put in Holy Cross Lutheran Church during World War II because they had a fire and their Schulke organ burned up.
Okay.
And then there's another Kilbin. There's a large Kilbin tracker in Sedalia that exists today, but it's not used.
Okay.
And then there's a totally pristine one that I was into first of all at Cumberland Presbyterian Church. It's a nice stencil facade. It can still be pumped by hand, and that was retained when the big double rise bellows was done over.
Okay.
The amazing things, they're small, but they'll play a lot of literature and they accompany church. And there's little Henners around here. Sure. And they're still going strong.
Yeah, there's some delightful.
So I've enjoyed working on those because they're certainly worthy of preservation. And of course, there are some organs so bad that aren't, but Uh, yeah, those are few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In your early time with the OHS, what is your memory of some of the founding generations, people like Barbara Owen, Randy Wagner?
Oh, wow. Certainly pivotal, and thank goodness they started it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, 40 some years ago, was involved with the St. Louis OHS chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Thomas who was registrar at Covenant Seminary, was very big into that and introduced me to the world of Pfeffers. And then another person had started the rebuild of a substantial Kinkham organ at the seminary. And we eventually took over that contract. And that was revealing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite nice.
And you are now current chair of the board of directors.
Chair of the board, yes.
Mm-hmm. What have been the biggest changes that have occurred at OHS since you joined?
Stability, focus, improving the financial standing of the organization. Ed McCall has been outstanding, in my opinion, in every way. Of course, other people disagree, but at least we have a wonderful endowment.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to grow. We're not backsliding.
Mm-hmm.
We have the best organ archives in the world now. And there's vast all of the molar collection is there. E.M. Skinner, A.O.N. Skinner, S.D. Reuter, and Kilgreen and Lane, A.O.N. and others. So you can go back and look at those. Yes, there are things missing, but there's so much there for which you can do research.
Right. Wonderful. What can the OHS do to stay relevant and dynamic?
Continue to educate. And that's part of the whole business, is to educate, especially to keep the good tonal concept and ideas from the past so people don't forget them. And to show what other people did as far as organ playing and how significant they really were. And we forget those fine players. Just reading in the TAO about Claire Coachy.
Yes.
An incredible performer. She played in St. Joseph there at First Christian. And I thought it was interesting, her comments about playing. One of her students asked what the difference was between her playing in Biggs and Fox. And she says, Biggs is very dry. Fox is too wet. And I'm in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But her pedal technique was formidable.
Yeah.
Formidable. Especially in heels.
So did you hear her live in St. Joseph?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Blend it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
One of those landmark recitals.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose one of the most organists that I enjoy today and a longtime friend is Ken Cowan, just because of his performance and what he can do and his musicality and his incredible memory.
Yeah.
All the piston punches and everything, because he did 2 CDs at First Baptist Jackson on that 5-manual 155 rank, and they were a year apart. And the next year, because they hadn't used all the levels, of course, on the SSOS, he came back and remembered exactly where all of his pistons were.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And that's just how you store all that memory. But the one thing that he still does to this day, the piano is an integral part of everyday workout, is before he plays a concert, go find a piano to warm up on. Scales, all this up and down and sideways, backwards, whatever. And I think for organists today, most of them don't have sufficient keyboard skills to be ready.
Mm-hmm.
Like people in Kansas City who would want 8 years of piano, like Edna Scott and Billings, who used to be at Grace and Holy Trinity, who could do things like, is it the Mendelssohn First Sonata where you have the arpeggios, and most people do it with 2 hands? That woman could do it with 1. Well, let's see, another great one would have been Pal Weeper, whose music is, some of it's very interesting, but the only thing that people remember is the squirrel. And it was written for Grand Avenue, because on the Philomela you could hear the magnets click, and that's with the part where the squirrels were running around. He would play on that, and it was like their little claws with the chickadee ticks.
How cute.
Little things like that. So we can't ever underestimate, or we can't forget those people, because they still, thankfully, because of recordings, can teach us to this day. And it's just too bad things were far enough along that we don't have recordings of Linwood Farnham and those people. Because I really question that there are very few today that could have that kind of prodigious technique.
Yeah.
Or Edwin Lakes Lemaire.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this has been wonderful.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely.
I've learned a lot, and it's been so interesting to follow your journey with the organ.
Thank you.
Over what has been a lifelong passion and pursuit and life's work.
That's true. Very much so.
And so thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure to speak with you today.
I've enjoyed it, David. Thank you very much.